Good afternoon and welcome everyone. My name is Lauren Taylor. I'm the Executive Director of Blue Ridge Prison. We're very excited to have with us today our guest speaker, Lisa Wittenborn. Lisa's joining us today to talk about stream health and invasive plants, and I'm so delighted that she's joining us. I was able to hear Lisa give this presentation at the Middle James Roundtable, and it wasn't recorded. So I asked her if she would recreate this for us because it deals with the fascinating world below the water, and our focus is usually terrestrial. And so it was so eye-opening, and I learned so much from her, and I'm so grateful that she's going to share this with you today. First, a little bit about Lisa. She began working with the Rivanna Conservation Alliance in 2017 as an education volunteer, and soon after joined the staff, becoming the executive director in June of 2020. She oversees all of the Rivanna Conservation Alliance's work and has a special interest in water quality restoration projects, and also helped found the Rivanna Forest Restoration Partnership, of which Blue Ridge Prison is a member. Prior to working with RCA, she was the first director of the Mills River Partnership, a nonprofit watershed protection group near Asheville, North Carolina, where she helped initiate and manage programs in the areas of agricultural best management practices and environmental education and watershed planning. She has a bachelor's in environmental science from the University of Virginia, a master's in environmental science and engineering from UNC Chapel Hill, and a PhD in city and regional planning from UNC Chapel Hill. And her PhD focused on water quality policy and management. So she's well suited to talk on this. She's also a Chesapeake Bay landscape professional and a Rivanna master naturalist. And when she's not working, she spends her time playing with her two sons, walking her dog, and battling invasive plants on her property in Albemarle County. So we have just a couple of quick housekeeping announcements. If you're having any audio issues with Zoom, make sure your Zoom is connected properly. In the lower left corner, you'll see your audio settings. You can open the menu by clicking the arrow. Worst case scenario, you can leave the meeting and come back. And we do have closed captioning enabled, and you can turn it on at the bottom of your screen if you're having trouble with your audio. During the meeting, we do hold questions until the end. If you have a question for Lisa or someone on our panel, we ask that you use the Q&A function, which is on the right-hand side of your menu bar at the bottom. If you're just sharing information with each other, like tips or links, please use the chat function, which is on the left-hand side. If you put a question in the chat, we won't see it and Lisa won't get a chance to answer it. So please remember to put the questions in the Q&A function. And a quick reminder, we're in the middle of our second annual Virginia Retail Garden Center Invasive Plant Survey. This is happening now through September 30th when the nurseries close out their inventory. You can go to virginiainvasives.org and pull up the survey on your phone as you walk around your local garden center and help us find invasive plants that are being sold in retail stores. We really need this data, and we're very excited to have everyone join us. We're about a little over 25% of the way toward our goal of getting 258 surveys this year, twice as many as last year. And as I mentioned just a moment ago, next month's Brown Bag webinar, we're hosting Laura Greenlee and Catherine McGuigan from the James River Invasive Plant Task Force, who are going to share their inspirational story of managing a longstanding and very successful park program for invasive plants. Another really fabulous presentation. And with that, Lisa, I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over to you.
Get set up here. All right, are we good? Okay.
Perfect.
Great. Thanks, Lauren. I'm really excited to be here with all of you today. Exciting to have folks from all over Virginia joining in, and some familiar faces and a lot are familiar names and a lot of folks I don't know, but I'm excited to share with you a little bit about an issue I'm very passionate about, which is stream health and invasive plants. This is something that I've been learning more about in recent years, and more people need to know about it. So I appreciate the opportunity today. So just to get started, a little bit of background on my organization, since most of you are not from the Charlottesville area. Rivanna Conservation Alliance, or RCA, is a small nonprofit organization based in Charlottesville, Virginia. We've been working in the Rivanna watershed for actually now 36 years. We have a pretty small staff, only about 5.5 full-time equivalents. And we get a lot of work done thanks in large part to the many community partnerships we have, including groups like Blue Ridge Prism and a huge volunteer workforce. We engage volunteers on almost every single thing we do. And our mission is to work with the community to conserve the Rivanna River watershed through water quality monitoring, restoration, education, and stewardship. Since most of you are not from the Rivanna area, just to orient you a little bit to where we are in Virginia, we are kind of smack dab in the middle of the state. We are about a 766 square mile watershed with our headwaters in the Blue Ridge Mountains in Shenandoah National Park. And then the Rivanna River runs down alongside the city of Charlottesville through Fluvanna County, and it enters the James River in a small town called Columbia. So the Rivanna watershed is part of the James River watershed and also part of the Chesapeake Bay watershed. We have programs in a lot of different areas, but in a nutshell, we do a lot of educational programming. We really seem to specialize in working with middle school students, which are a tough audience sometimes, but we take all of the middle school students from Albemarle County and the city of Charlottesville on watershed exploration field trips each year. We get them out into local streams doing water quality testing and learning about the impacts of things that they do in their own life on our water resources. We do a lot of stewardship activities like cleanups and tire pulls. We've removed hundreds of tires from the Rivanna River in the past several years. We try to get as many people out to enjoy the river as possible, especially folks who've not had that opportunity before. We do a lot of restoration work, including invasive management, which I'll talk more about later. And we're really known for our water quality monitoring programs, which have been in place for more than 20 years. We have two programs. One is focused on bacteria monitoring. So we're really focused on recreational health. So is a river safe and healthy to be swimming or boating in? And we also do biological monitoring. We have 50 monitoring locations throughout our watershed. We've been sampling spring and fall for 20 years. We have a really nice long-term data set, which helps us identify changes and trends over time. And we're actually the only nonprofit in Virginia that has those two programs certified at the highest level of quality by the Department of Environmental Quality. So all of our data goes right into the database with DEQ's data. It's used for assessments, for determining if our streams are meeting water quality standards, developing cleanup plans, and tracking implementation. And we also do a lot of advocacy. We are really the voice of the Rivanna River in the watershed, so we step in as needed around different issues in the community. So what we're here to talk about today is really the issue of stream health and how invasive plants specifically are tied to stream health. I usually give this presentation in a more interactive setting, so I like to ask folks in the audience about what they're noticing as differences between these two streams to help them think about what we can see that makes a stream appear to be healthier than a stream that appears to be degraded. So hopefully you all have guessed that the stream on the left is the one that is the healthier stream, and the stream on the right is the one that is degraded. And I will just point out some of the features that you hopefully are also seeing in these two images. So on the left, we've got a stream that is surrounded by vegetation. The stream on the right, almost all of the vegetation has been removed, so there's nothing but grass, and grass doesn't have very deep roots, so it's not holding in the soil or stabilizing the banks. So you see on the left-hand image that the river or the stream banks are pretty flat. They're not very steep, and they're very well protected. On the right, the banks are very steep. This is a stream that we call incised, like an incisor tooth. It's cut down deep and straight into the substrate. And that is allowing a lot of soil to get washed into the stream and sit on the bottom. So that's another thing that you might notice is what's on the bottom of the two streams. On the left, you can see big rocks, small rocks. You can kind of imagine that there is a big variety of material in that stream, but it's mostly hard material. There's probably some sediment in there, but that's not the dominant substrate material. Whereas on the right, it really just looks like a muddy substrate. So in that stream, that soil is washing off the banks and it's being deposited in the bottom of the stream where it's interfering with things that live there and creating a silty condition. You might also notice the stream on the left. It looks nice and cool. That's because of the shade provided by the trees. On the right, you kind of imagine that water is probably pretty warm, probably doesn't have a lot of oxygen in it, and probably not very clean water. So it is hard to look at these pictures and really know what's going on with the water itself, but you can kind of infer that the water quality on the left is probably better than the water quality on the right, just based on the physical characteristics of the two streams. So when we're trying to determine if a stream is healthy or not, we are looking at these types of physical characteristics that I just went over. We're also looking at the water quality itself. So we can take a sample of water from the stream and we can test the chemical constituents and also the physical parameters of the stream, the temperature, dissolved oxygen, nutrient levels, pH, turbidity, things like that are all going to tell us how clean that water is. But looking at water quality alone is not a really good indicator of what's going on with that stream long term, because as we all know, water is flowing through a stream continuously. And so the water quality measurements can actually change very quickly over time. Because of that, we need another way to really analyze the health of a stream, something that's going to give us a longer term picture of what's going on there. And the way we do that is by looking at what is actually living in the stream. We use organisms as indicators of stream health. So this is, I was talking about one of RCA's water quality monitoring programs is focused on biological health. This is exactly what we do in these 50 stream locations throughout the Rivanna watershed. We look at organisms that are called benthic macroinvertebrates, and that is a long name for something that's actually pretty simple. Benthic means at the bottom of a stream. Macro means you can see it with your naked eye. And an invertebrate, you all hopefully remember, means it's something without an internal backbone. So these are organisms that have shells or external casings or exoskeletons that keep them intact. And these are things like larval stages of dragonflies or mayflies, crustaceans like crayfish, mollusks like clams, things like that that live in our streams. And these are really good indicators of water quality across the world because these organisms are found in pretty much all aquatic environments, and many of them live for multiple years. So they have a lot of exposure to what's going on in a stream. So the water quality itself can change minute by minute, but those organisms need to be able to survive in the stream for long periods of time. And so that really gives us a longer term picture. And there's been a lot of research on these organisms to understand their very specific tolerance levels to different pollutants and different stream conditions. So we know a lot about these organisms. So basically, we're able to take a sample using nets of these organisms in the stream, and then we identify and count them. And that information allows us to calculate a very scientific stream health score. So we're looking at the abundance of organisms and the diversity of the macroinvertebrates in our samples. And so these indicator organisms help us calculate the stream health score, which is really a more comprehensive and long-term picture of what is going on in a stream and how healthy it is. Just to give you an idea of some of these different bugs that I'm talking about, I have 3 slides here divided into the sensitive bugs, those that tolerate kind of middle conditions, and those that can pretty much live anywhere. So these are our sensitive bugs. That's what we like to call them. These are intolerant organisms. They do not tolerate poor stream conditions. They don't tolerate much pollution and they don't tolerate low oxygen conditions. And I think if you look at these organisms, you can kind of understand why they can't tolerate bad water quality or low oxygen. If you can see, a lot of these organisms have very sensitive gill structures. I don't know if you can see my pointer, but here and here and here, those are all gills. And those gills are helping pull oxygen out of the water column so the organisms can breathe. And if there's a lot of silt or other pollutants in the water, they're not able to obtain the oxygen that they need. So that's one of the reasons why they don't tolerate poor water quality. Then we get into kind of our moderate bugs. So these bugs will live in very healthy streams, but they also can tolerate streams that are not quite as pristine. Things like dragonflies and damselflies, different types of beetles and crustaceans, like the crayfish I talked about. That bottom right one is called a scud. It's like a little shrimp almost. And these organisms, they can do a little bit better in situations where the water quality is not ideal. And then we've got the group that we like to call our tough bugs. These are organisms that are pretty tolerant of poor water quality. They're not very sensitive. And again, I think if you look at their body structures, you might be able to kind of infer that part of the reason they can tolerate poor conditions is that they don't have those sensitive gill structures. They actually absorb a lot of oxygen right through their bodies. So they are better able to obtain oxygen in poor water quality conditions. So in a healthy stream, we're going to find all of these bugs. We're going to find the tolerant all the way to the intolerant. In a very poor quality stream, we're only going to find these tolerant or tough bugs. All right, so let's talk a little bit about why riparian vegetation matters. What difference does it make if there is vegetation around a stream? So we talked about the physical integrity and water quality conditions of a stream as being key components of stream health. And we talked about this a little bit already, but when you have vegetation around a stream, it is really helping protect both of those things, the physical integrity and the water quality. That vegetation, trees, shrubs, herbaceous plants on the ground are all going to help slow down runoff. So when it rains and the water is heading towards that stream quickly, that vegetation is going to help slow it down, which is going to decrease the volume and speed of water entering the stream, which is going to reduce erosion in the stream. Slowing that water down also promotes infiltration of that runoff into the ground. So that's going to help move some of that water into the shallow groundwater, which is important not only for reducing erosion in the stream, but also for providing a resource to help replenish stream levels during drier conditions in the year. That vegetation and all of its roots are going to help hold those banks together. They really knit together to hold the soil in place. And the trees and shrubs also are going to provide a lot of shade, which is going to help keep that water cool. And cool water is really important for the organisms that live in a stream. Cold water can hold a lot more oxygen, so the dissolved oxygen levels can be a lot higher when the water is cool. And when the water gets too warm, it actually really stresses the organisms that live in our streams. It increases their metabolism. They become more sensitive to pollutants and other diseases and poor water quality conditions. So cool water is very important. That vegetation also is just going to physically help trap things that are being carried in runoff towards the stream, whether that's trash or sediment or anything else that the runoff might pick up off the ground. And trees and shrubs also have a special power of actually taking up pollutants. So when they are sucking water out of the ground, they are pulling the pollutants with that water and holding onto it. You can find in some industrial sites where they're doing remediation, they actually will plant trees in a process they call phytoremediation. So they actually use trees to help take pollutants out of the water and clean up the environment. So vegetation is very important for our physical integrity and water quality of streams. But it's also incredibly important for the life in the stream. So looking at that third way that we evaluate stream health, the biological integrity of the stream, riparian vegetation, kind of surprisingly, is incredibly important for what's going on in our stream. And this is something that a lot of people don't know and I think is really important for us to understand. When you think about a food web, so if you go back to elementary or middle school science class and you think about the food web, at the bottom of that food web are the primary producers, which are plants. Those plants are growing. Then you've got the first level of consumers, the things that are eating those plants, and then you go on up through the food chain. In a stream, there's really typically not that much primary production going on in a stream. There might be some vegetation growing in a stream, there might be some algae, but it's not enough primary production in the stream to really fuel the whole aquatic food web. So really what you find is that in most streams, especially smaller streams or headwater streams, that most of the primary production or the carbon that's fueling that food web is actually coming from vegetation from outside the stream. It's coming from the riparian vegetation, the trees and shrubs that are growing all along the banks of that waterway. So in that sense, the vegetation is really important. And not only is it important just to provide the carbon, but it also contributes nutrients and soluble organic compounds to the water that some people call watershed tea. So as those leaves are breaking down, they're releasing these compounds into the water, which are also important for the organisms. And also the vegetation on the banks is contributing woody debris into the stream. So a tree falls over, a branch falls down into the water. It is going to help trap leaves and other materials to form different habitat pockets within the stream itself. So the way this works for the bugs in the stream, or what happens with the bugs in the stream, is that they are really, really dependent on leaf litter coming in from the riparian areas around a stream. So think about in the fall, you have a lot of leaves falling into a stream. Those leaves are going to pretty quickly get colonized by different microbes, both fungal and bacterial microbes. And those microbes are going to start breaking down the leaves in the water slowly. They're going to form kind of a biofilm on those leaves. That biofilm then becomes the food source for one class of our benthic macroinvertebrates that we call scrapers. There's a scraper called flathead mayfly. That's a good example of an organism that comes along and it's going to eat that biofilm off of the leaves. That helps further break down the leaves to the point where they're getting softer, and another class of benthic macroinvertebrates called shredders are going to be able to come in, and they actually eat the larger pieces of the leaves. And examples of those are caddisflies and stoneflies. Then, as the shredders are eating those larger pieces of leaves, you're getting very small pieces that are like entering the water column. And then another class of organisms that we call collectors or filterers are actually then kind of filtering those fine particulate matter pieces out of the water and using those as a food source. And an example of a filterer would be a freshwater mussel, which are really important for clean water. So you see these leaves are kind of forming a food source as they're breaking down for lots of different types of macroinvertebrates. And then those macroinvertebrates become food sources for other organisms that live in the stream, like fish. And because a lot of them are actually the larval stages of flying insects, like dragonflies and caddisflies and mayflies, they also are an important food source for things in our terrestrial ecosystem. So then the question is, we can see that vegetation is really important. It's super important to have a lot of trees and shrubs growing along our streams and rivers to protect them physically, protect the water quality, and to provide kind of the food sources that the organisms in the stream rely on. But does it make a difference if that vegetation is native or non-native? And this is a question that I started looking into a couple of years back. And you can probably tell since I'm giving this talk today that it does matter. It does matter. Um, and there are quite a few reasons why. So we've all heard the stories about oak trees host hundreds and hundreds of different kinds of insects, and some of our non-native invasive trees only host a few. And that's largely because those insects evolved along with the oak trees. We have a lot of pairings of plants and invertebrates that rely on each other. And the same thing is true in our aquatic ecosystem. So our macroinvertebrates evolved in the systems that they did with the native plants that were fueling the growth in those streams. So those native macroinvertebrates really rely on a very specific chemical composition of watershed tea that those native plants provide. And they rely on the nutrition that those particular leaves contribute to the aquatic system. What a lot of people don't realize or think about is that they also rely on a large diversity of leaves because if most of the leaves that are entering our stream are all coming in the fall when the deciduous trees lose their leaves. That's when there's a big influx of organic matter into our streams. But these macroinvertebrates live in the streams year round. So they need food sources that are going to last throughout the year until the next influx of leaves. So if you have leaves coming in that all decompose and get broken down quickly, you're not going to have food sources that will last through the whole year and keep that macroinvertebrate population going through the spring and summer. So you need leaves, some leaves that break down quickly, some that break down kind of at an intermediate rate, and then some that are going to be pretty tough and hold on to become a food source for those macroinvertebrates through the next year. So when you have leaves from all one species or from non-native species, which tend to break down faster in water, this can really have an impact on our macroinvertebrate populations, both the diversity and their abundance. So this illustration might look a little crazy, but let me talk you through it. I think it's really interesting. So look at the condition on the left where you have a mix of deciduous trees. So in this stream, you've got native trees and you've got a variety of native trees. So you've got leaves that are breaking down at different rates entering the stream. This is supporting a year-round population of benthic macroinvertebrates, a healthy population that is supporting a healthy population of fish and other organisms in the stream. It's contributing to a lot of emergence of the flying stage of those aquatic insects, which is going to feed birds and other things in the terrestrial ecosystem. And most of the carbon entering that stream in the form of leaves is being taken up and held within the food web. So very little of the carbon is actually escaping into the atmosphere. If you look at the middle situation where you've got cottonwoods, which are native, but if it's a monoculture, it's all one type of tree. So the leaves are really all going to be degrading at the same rate. And maybe they're not going to hold up through the whole year. It's going to start depressing the macroinvertebrate population, which is going to have implications for the other aquatic organisms. Fewer insects are going to emerge from that stream, which is going to affect what's going on in the terrestrial ecosystem. And more of the leaves in the water are going to be broken down by microbes rather than taken up into the food web. And when that happens, more carbon dioxide is released into the atmosphere. So the stream is not holding as much of the carbon, it's releasing it. And in the last condition, you've got a stream that really has just a monoculture of non-native plants, tamarisk here, which I think is something that grows out west. Those leaves break down very quickly in the water. They do not support a very healthy macroinvertebrate population. There's not going to be much emerging from that stream. And most of the leaf litter that's entering that stream is going to be broken down by microbes. which is going to then release most of that carbon back to the atmosphere. So not only does this have an implication for what's going on in the stream and the terrestrial ecosystem, but also in terms of carbon flux from the streams. So that's been all kind of a theoretical discussion, but I want to just give you a little bit of empirical evidence of this. There have been more and more studies showing the effects of invasives on stream health, and this is one that I really like to point to. So in this study, which took place in southern Ohio, the researchers were looking at a plant called amber honeysuckle or Lonicera mackii. I think I'm saying that right. So in the Midwest, especially, that plant is very dominant in riparian zones and it really pushes out the native plants. So it can become really a monoculture of that honeysuckle shrub growing up along the streams. And it's important because the leaf litter from that amber honeysuckle breaks down about 5 times faster than the native vegetation would in the stream, and the leaf litter is much higher in nitrogen, so it's affecting the chemical composition of the water. So in this study, the authors were testing whether removing L. mackii would increase the density and diversity of macroinvertebrates in the study stream. And the way they tested this was by doing a lot of intensive macroinvertebrate sampling, kind of the same sampling that RCA does. So they did a lot of testing before they did anything to the stream to gather their baseline data. And then they removed the honeysuckle from 160 meters of the stream, going out 5 meters on each side. And they left all the native plants and debris in place. And then they did a lot of post-treatment sampling, both in the 160-meter stretch that had been treated, where the honeysuckle was removed, and also in a 160-meter stretch of stream above where they had removed the honeysuckle. So they had kind of a ability to compare and contrast what happened in those two stream segments. And they did monthly sampling for 3 years, so pretty extensive sampling after that treatment. And what they found was that in the area they had removed the honeysuckle, there was a significantly higher macroinvertebrate density than in the area that they did not remove the honeysuckle, and that the community composition and structure were quite different in the two areas. So they had clear evidence that the honeysuckle was making a significant impact on the benthic macroinvertebrate community there. And that removing that honeysuckle actually made a big difference and happened pretty quickly. So they found that invasive plants are important for macroinvertebrate communities. And because of that, it can affect the entire food web, and removing the plants helped. So the key takeaways from all of this are that we really need to pay more attention to the connections between our terrestrial and aquatic systems. It's easy to think of them as separate, but they really are very interconnected, and what happens in one is going to affect what happens in another. And that study really shows us that it's important to try to control invasive plant infestations in critical areas like headwater streams and riparian buffers, where those invasive plants are going to have a very important impact on our stream health. And that study also points to the fact that we can do something about it. So if we remove those invasive plants, and then if we restore them with native plants, that's really going to be a boost for our stream health scores. So that's all easy to say, but where do we start? What do we do from here? And so I'm going to spend the rest of my time talking about a project that RC has been working on, and Blue Ridge Prism has been one of our key partners. And hopefully this will inspire some of you to start similar things in your own communities, maybe. So the way we started was by reaching out to all of our community partners, because we knew that there were a lot of different organizations starting to think about these issues, dealing with the implications of the invasive plant issue, especially along our waterways, and that we all needed to be working together. Excuse me. So we started a group called the Rivanna Forest Restoration Partnership. And the reason we got this going was because around the time of COVID, RCA and other organizations in the community started holding invasive management work days, but they were really ad hoc. They were kind of places where it was easy to get to. There was easy pickings in terms of cutting vines and that sort of thing. But we weren't really talking to each other. We weren't really thinking very strategically about where we were working. And so we weren't really having much of an impact. And so we started really seeing the need to work together. We needed a more strategic approach. And for RCA, because we're really a strong community science organization, that meant we wanted data. We wanted to be able to make some decisions based on what's actually happening out there. And we wanted to coordinate with all of our partners so we could increase our efficiency and impact and really make a measurable difference. So we convened a project team, which included a bunch of groups, including Blue Ridge Prism. We applied for a big grant, and we were successful, which was very exciting. So we started our project in 2023, 2024, and we kind of focused on two geographic scopes. Bigger picture, we were looking at the 5 mile, we call the urban corridor of the Rivanna River around Charlottesville. And at that scale, we were really looking at partnership development, reaching out to private property owners to learn about what they were doing, what barriers they were experiencing in terms of managing invasives on their property, and just doing general education and outreach and engagement. And then we really focused our on the ground work in 3 public parks that are in that river corridor. These are Penn Park, Dardentow Park, and Riverview Park. And so in those 3 parks, we mapped out all of the riparian forest areas. We divided those areas into distinct management units and collected data. And then we used that data to come up with our management plans and guide our invasive management and tree planting work and maintenance. So here's a picture from one of our early meetings, and a couple of you on this call are actually in this picture, so you can look for yourself. But the mission of our group is to work together to improve the health and resilience of riparian forests, starting in the urban corridor of the Rivanna River by inspiring, educating, and empowering the community to manage invasive plants and restore native habitats. So we're trying to do both things. We're trying to improve the health by removing the invasives and restoring natives. So quickly, how we collected our data. I mentioned we divided all these forest areas into different management units. We developed a protocol and data sheet. We recruited and trained 35 community volunteers, and we had some really great people come out for this, a lot of landscape architects and folks that we hadn't really worked with before. So that was exciting. We sent them out with assessment backpacks, and we then collected all their data, recorded it, quality checked it, and mapped the results. And just to give you an idea of what some of these maps look like, this is Riverview Park in Charlottesville. This is the city's only public access to the Rivanna River. It's probably the most used park in the entire city. And this map is looking at the percent cover of native canopy. So think about this like you are a bird looking down at the park, and you are seeing how much of the ground is covered by native trees at the canopy level. So that's what this map is showing. And blue is the highest coverage, 75 to 100% of the ground would be covered by native canopy. Red's the lowest in those areas. There's essentially no native canopy, it's 0 to 5%. And you can see in this park, it's highly variable what's going on with the native canopy. Looking at the invasive canopy, so this is the same thing. Pretend you're a bird, you're looking down at the ground, you're seeing how much of at the canopy level is invasive plants. And we had a list of 14 specific trees, vines, and shrubs that we were looking at. So when we're looking at the canopy level, we're not only looking at invasive trees, but we're also looking at trees that are covered in invasive vines. So just any invasive at the canopy level. And again, highly variable conditions. Some areas are really bad. Some areas where volunteers had been cutting vines for years were pretty good, especially right along the river. And the interesting thing is we collected this data not only at the canopy level, but at the shrub level and the ground level. And you can see that the invasive cover gets actually much worse. This is the shrub level, and this is the ground level. So we're right now just working mostly at the canopy level, but this is important for future management decisions, knowing that there's a lot on the ground that's just looking for an opportunity to grow. So how did we use that data to decide where to work? That was a lot of discussion. It was not as easy as I thought it was going to be, thinking through it. But in the end, we decided to go with the simplest approach, which was simply to look at areas that had both high levels of native canopy and high levels of invasives in the canopy. So our goal really is to preserve that native canopy that's growing along the river to protect the river and water quality. So we wanted to work in areas that still have a lot of native trees in them, but then we wanted to focus on areas where those native trees are at the most risk. So those are places where there also is a lot of high invasive presence in the canopy. So we kind of averaged those two scores, mapped that, and then thought through some other issues like access to that area for volunteers or contractors, how close the management unit was to the river. The closer to the river, the more important we thought it was. Does working in that particular area provide other benefits to the community? Is it a place where there are trails or people are really visiting and trying to experience nature? The ability to control the edges was something we were really focused on because we didn't want to do a bunch of work and then just have invasives coming in from neighboring properties that we couldn't do anything about. Um, so we ended up selecting one unit in each of these parks for volunteers to manage. And we selected units that were not the worst because we wanted the volunteers to feel successful and be successful. And we wanted places that were easy to access. And then we saved some of the harder places for the contractor that we ended up hiring with the grant funding we had. So in Riverview, this green area is where our volunteers worked, and the red areas were where we sent the contractor. So in terms of our on-the-ground work, since winter of 2024, we've had volunteers actively managing 12 acres of forest in these three parks. We've had about 450 volunteer shifts. I think almost 300 unique volunteers have come out to help us with this project. We continue to have monthly work days in two of the parks. And then we had contractors in 2024 treat about 15 acres across the three parks. 1 acre of that was forestry mulched, and the rest was cut stump treatment or basal bark spraying of shrubs. In addition to what our project is doing, our partners with Albemarle County and Charlottesville Parks and Rec have been doing their own additional invasive management kind of adjacent to our work areas. So our footprint's actually even bigger than that. And we are about to hire a contractor to go back in this year to retreat all these same areas. So we're trying to not treat once and walk away, but really stay on top of resprouts and other emerging issues. Just a couple pictures of some of the invasive management work on the right. Upper right is a before picture from Dardentow Park. And below that is the after picture. This is where we actually brought the forestry mulcher in. So we were able to preserve the few native trees that were growing in this really invaded area. And then we've gone in and replanted hundreds of new trees. So we'll be growing a new native forest there. So speaking of tree planting, across the three parks, we've planted over 1,800 trees. We selected the species based on data we collected in those original assessments. So we were trying to replant trees that are already growing in the parks, but add some diversity. And we planted in areas that we treated. So kind of infill plantings largely, or where we did the forestry mulching, of course, we were able to plant just more like bare ground. But we're trying to really enhance the canopy in those areas that we're treating. So the next steps for our project, fortunately, we are supposed to be receiving another large grant to keep our partnership going and even expand our work into more public lands along the Rivanna and its major tributaries. We've got ongoing public work days each month that RCA leads in Riverview and Darden Tow, and our partners like Prism are managing areas in Penn Park, and sometimes those I think are open to the public as well. We've got lots of other partnership activities ongoing. We just wrapped up 3 bio blitzes, one in each park in some of the areas that we've been treating just to see what is actually living there. We have a program we called Hack Packs, which is like a lending library for invasive management tools and supplies and guidance that we lend out to anyone in the community that wants to work on their own property. And we have ongoing education and outreach activities throughout the year. And that's it for my presentation. So, and if you would like to learn more, this QR code will take you to the partnerships website.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Always great to hear all that again. And I picked up on so many things that I had forgotten from the first time I saw it. And I think I want to watch the recording and pick up on even more. But we have lots of questions for you. Um, let's see, where do we want to start here? Grant is asking the question, what do you know about chub nests as an indicator for stream health?
I have seen chub nests, and I know that chubs are important for some of our freshwater mussel species. They're actually it's too much to go into now, but our mussels depend on certain host fish to carry their larvae to distribute them within the stream. And bluehead chub are an important species in our streams here. I don't know the answer to your question exactly though about the chub nests being an indicator. I have seen nests in some pretty degraded streams of mountain red belly dace, which I think might also share nests with chubs. So I'm not sure of the relationship there. Sorry.
Joe is asking, would it be possible to send some pictures of her stream in for advice with it? Does RCA take pictures of streams and help answer questions for people?
You're certainly welcome to send me pictures. I will see what I can do. It's sometimes hard just to see from a picture, but happy to try to help or direct you to other resources if I can't help you.
Sarah's asking, how was the honeysuckle removed? By hand or by herbicide? And I'm guessing that by the timestamp that she's referring to the study with the Amur honeysuckle.
Now I'm wishing I had reread that study last night. It's been a few years. So I am not sure about that. My vague memory is that it was manual removal, but I'm not 100% sure. I can certainly share a link to that study if anyone would like to look at the details.
Yeah, that'd be great. If you can send that to Diana, we can send that out with the
Okay.
recording. Let's see. How can streams coming out of cattle standing in the water pastures be remediated?
Um, well, the first thing, of course, is to fence the cattle out of the stream. And then depending on the level of degradation, like how incised the stream is, sometimes streams need to be physically restored. They need to have the banks regraded and planted. Sometimes the need to put meanders back into the stream, so it's not just a straight line. And a lot of our agricultural fields, streams were historically ditched. So they took a very curvy stream and they turned it into a straight ditch, which also can contribute to water quality problems because the water moves very quickly. So in some situations, you really need to add some of the the meanders or curves back into the stream. But just fencing cattle out and planting riparian buffers makes a huge difference, and the streams will eventually repair themselves over time. It just might take a lot longer than doing an intensive regrading restoration project that can speed up the healing process.
Emma's asking, how can we get involved with biological monitoring through RCA?
That is a great question. We actually are about to hold our training sessions. We have our fall season coming up. We do require everyone to go through training and to go out in the field with our certified monitors to get experience. But we will have those dates and signups available on our website very soon. It's rivannariver.org.
And Pearl is asking, how popular are the hack packs?
Sadly, not that popular yet. We need to do a better job. We just got them together this spring. So we really need to do a better job of getting the word out about them. But we kind of modeled this on a cleanup kit program that we started during COVID, where we put together backpacks for people who wanted to do their own stream cleanups. And that has over time become really popular. So we're hoping that more people will kind of pick up on the hack pack um, idea and take advantage of that.
Randy's asking, I see some lakes discourage homeowners putting leaves into the lake, for example, Smith Mountain Lake. They say this practice is not beneficial to the health of Smith Mountain Lake. Is that true for lakes?
I am not a lake expert, but lakes are really quite different. And I think when you have a lot of organic material in a lake, it can kind of build up and create a lot of muck, and that might create some other water quality problems. What we're looking at is moving water, much more dynamic systems where the leaves are actually able to break down, and there's more activity around related to the leaves than there might be in a lake.
I'm guessing that probably a lot of the homes around Smith Mountain Lake also have non-native trees in their landscaping, and that may be a factor as well. Paul is asking, a friend told me with great satisfaction that he removed a tree which had fallen across a stream. I gave him two reasons, greater infiltration and reduced downstream flooding. Such falls are beneficial, but when is it better to remove such tree falls?
That's a good
Or
question. We actually get this question a lot. People call us out because they're worried about their stream, and what they're worried about is the logs and branches and things in their stream. And we try our best to convince people that that's typically a good thing to have in your stream. The only time when it might be beneficial to remove a tree that's fallen across a stream is if it is really blocking the flow to the extent that it's creating a lot more erosion, like it's diverting the stream in such a way that it's creating a new channel or something like that. I mean, I wouldn't do anything in a natural area, but if it's in your yard and you don't want stream to change course or to create new erosion, that might be a time to do it. But otherwise, organic material in our streams is generally a good thing.
Jonathan is asking, is there a strategy for long-term management of the understory and ground layers at riparian parks along the Rivanna? Are you hoping for adequate natural regeneration of natives, or are you considering planting if necessary?
That's also a good question. We have largely been ignoring the ground level in these parks, because part of being strategic for us is keeping our eye on the prize, which right now is protecting the existing tree canopy. But as we make more headway in that goal, we will be kind of shifting our focus down. We have had some volunteer events that have been more opportunistic, focused on the ground layer. Like we've had garlic mustard poles, and we've been tackling Japanese hops a little bit before it's gotten too big. Um, but we don't at this point have a clear strategy for what we're going to do on the ground level. We are actually seeing a lot of native things pop back up in places where we've worked. We saw some bluebells coming up in the area that we forestry mulch in Dardentown Park, and so we're documenting things like that. But we're not actively planting anything herbaceous at this moment. But I can see that down the road. We just have to do a good job with what we're focused on right now before we can get there.
Kay's asking, do you know what native aquatic plants could outcompete invasive parrot feather?
That is definitely not my area of expertise, unfortunately. I would direct you to somebody like, I'm trying to think of that pond management company. Solitude Lake Management is, I actually have a pond in my backyard and I've reached out to them before to ask questions like that. But yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not an expert on aquatic invasives.
Judy's asking, how did you deal with volunteers and herbicide use? That is, could volunteers use herbicide directly?
This is something that we're still trying to figure out. We're struggling with a little bit. We have not had volunteers using herbicides up to this point, and that's based on our localities not being willing to allow that. That's one of the things that our partnership is starting to talk more and more about, and we are trying to find workarounds, but at this point, Albemarle County and the city of Charlottesville have not allowed our volunteers to use herbicides, even though there is now the ability to do that from the state level.
Sophia is asking, how are you managing the sequencing of removal of invasive woody vegetation closest to the river with consideration to shade and erosion control?
We have not been removing things right on the riverbanks yet. In some places we're working, the banks are so steep that we can't safely do that. So we're kind of starting more at the top of bank and working back. That is a really challenging question, especially we have some areas with knotweed infestations, and it's very tricky to get anything to grow in those areas, and it's also very tricky to treat those areas. Sometimes it almost feels like you're doing more harm than good when you're removing invasives right on the bank when you know you can't get something different to grow there. But that's also an issue that we're talking a lot about and trying to sort through. This is really kind of adaptive management at its best, I think. I would describe our approach. We're all learning as we're doing. And if any of you have suggestions for any of these things, I would love to hear them because I think, learning from each other's experiences is incredibly important with this work.
Wendy is asking, she and a fellow weed warrior in Montgomery County, Maryland, removed non-native invasives from a first order stream. For shrub and grass invasives, which would you say are highest priority to remove with regard to benthic macroinvertebrate health? Multiflora rose, oriental bittersweet, winter creeper, or stiltgrass?
Um, I That's a tough question that I don't have a real scientific answer for that. I think the way that we're approaching things is to really think about your priorities, and is your priority to protect the trees that are growing along your stream? If so, you might target the bittersweet first. Is your priority to promote regeneration of natives at the ground level, then still grass might be, and the shrubs might be more important because they're shading everything out. It really, as far as their contribution of material to the stream, obviously the shrubs and the bittersweet might have more leaf litter than the stilt grass, but I think it really depends on your goals for the property and what you're hoping to accomplish.
And we're going to squeeze in one last question because I think this is a good one. Rosalind is asking, we live in Piedmont on a muddy bottom tributary of the James. that has excellent scores using Save Our Streams protocol. But in the last 5 years, the banks have been deeply cut by flash flooding because of development upstream, and the bottom of the stream has serious deposits of sand and mud. Is there any point in a landowner trying to plant riparian buffer? I don't think JRA, James River Association, will help in this case because the stream goes through a marsh, although it is disappearing because of sediment.
That's a complicated question, I think. Um, we work a lot with JRA and the James River Buffer Program, and I feel like if you've reached out to them and they don't think it's a viable place to plant a buffer, I would trust their judgment for sure on that. If the land is drying up and you think you could plant things that aren't going to get washed away, then it always feels worth it to me to try planting. But it is really tricky when you're suffering the impacts of things that are happening upstream and you don't have a lot of control over that. So that is a frustrating situation. But I do think riparian buffers, they're pretty cheap to install, and it's almost always worth trying as long as that's not going to disrupt a wetland or a marsh or some other system that you may have in your area that isn't supposed to be planted with trees and shrubs. I don't know if that answered the question or not, but
No, I think that was great. I think checking in with JRA and trusting what they say is great. Um, so it's 1:02. Thanks everybody for staying the extra couple of minutes. Lisa, thank you so, so much for providing this presentation and helping our audience grow with us and learn about the whole world under the surface of the water that we don't usually get to explore. So thank you for bringing so generously your expertise. And just a quick reminder to everyone, Blue Ridge Prism is a very small nonprofit. We rely on gifts from friends like you. And if you are so moved by this content, would like to see more of this, we always welcome a gift to help us keep this work going. So thank you so much. The recording will be emailed to everybody who registered, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your afternoon. Lisa, thanks so much.
thank you. Bye.
And I have to find what Zoom did with my stop recording button. Natalie, do you have controls?
So I'm trying to remove people from the attendees list, but I can't.
I am looking for our up pause and stop sharing. And there we go. Stop recording.